Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. Uh, I this is gonna be a bit disorganized. This is one of those disorganized streams. Oh, my cat's coming by. This is one of those disorganized streams. I've had I have a series of thoughts that have been brewing in my head from kind of somewhat disconnected topics that are they connect in my mind. They're all related, but like they don't quite cohere. It's kind of complicated. Um, but uh as you know, most of this channel is devoted to my own interpretations, expansions, commentaries on Transcendental Kabbalah, which is the system of philosophy that Hilo Hendricks is developing and that I am sort of, yeah, anyway. And it is mapped to the zodiac and the liturgical year. And the last section of it is called The Antinomies of Apocalyptic Humanism. I sort of wanted to make a video about those. I've talked about them before in videos. I have a video on suffering and lack that is related to the Felix Culpa one, especially, but some other ones. But anyway, um, and these have been on my mind. There's some other things that have been on my mind, but anyway, those are like right at the end of the year. I think we're on the arc section now, which is comes right after because we're in Capricorn now. Um, but what was I saying? Um, like I said, very disorganized stream. So I guess the main topic today is I want to talk about um activity, reactivity, um reason and desire, and images relating to struggle. Um, Here's what I've been thinking about. Um, I have been engaging with a lot of text recently that is talking about desire as productive, desire as prior to any kind of object. Like that there is an emergence, there's a force, this theme of a force that creates an object. Like so it's an attempt to think activity versus passivity versus reactivity, to think vitality. And this idea is connected to Nietzsche, especially, um, and like the master morality and the will to power, that there's these kind of emergent forces uh, that are creative, that you can tap into, that you can let channel through you, that are already happening anyway. And that's kind of a big important point, is they're already happening anyway, and you're dishonest if you don't recognize them there. And especially for Nietzsche, they're like prior to rationalizations, to the mind, um, to culture. Like they're what create culture. The rationalizations come after the fact, and there's this supreme dishonesty that he discusses in philosophers and regular people, where they don't admit, he says that they are really governed by these repulsive forces, this will to power that is inside of them, and it makes them sick that they don't. And it connects also to Marx, and the idea of production, production as being the thing that is the kind of grounds, material, that's what material production, like the recreation of life, um, the recreation of life, the you need food to eat, you need a shelter to live in, you need at base, but then there's also like society itself. You produce and reproduce society, you reproduce the population, and this is kind of the thing that is the main, for Marx, this is the real thing that's going on, the main thing that's going on, and that you have to wake up to the fact that, like, that is what determines what you think and who you are and your place in the world, and determines the way that governments are run and stuff, is like this pressing force um of production that's expanding and hitting limits and making use of people. um 1 second, I need water. And so and there's something in like, it has some kind of logic to it, but it's not a Oh, wait 1 second. I'm getting reports that there might be problems with this stream. Okay, anyway, yes. So there's this idea in Marx and Nietzsche of some kind of there's this primary activity that is you have to wake up to, that if you don't admit that that's what's primary, you're dishonest, but that being in touch with it, there's a vitality, there's a power, and there's a beauty to it. And they have very divergent views about what exactly this means. For Marx, this is a kind of hopeful thing, and like there's this presumption that justice is still possible somehow, or that it's visible through what exists currently, and that one can sort of scry the values of the future and allow them to come to pass. Whereas for Nietzsche, it's much more rough. It's much more, it's beyond good and evil. Um and there's this madness involved. It's much more individual, whereas for Marx it has to be collective. Uh but there's this primary activity. Primary activity, this special zone, uh that is beyond this special kind of logic that you can tap into. And then there's this other thing. It's sort of beyond. Oh shoot! There's two. There's a word I'm thinking of here. It's connected to this other theme that is prevalent in everything that's kind of past Kant, especially this idea of tapping into a kind of logic and a kind of power that is beyond voluntarism and determinism. There's this sort of otherness that you give yourself over to, that is you, or is more you than you. It's in you, that's more than you, and it transforms you, and it causes action in the world that doesn't seem to be possible. Like there's this breakthrough of grace, or of just power, or just breakthrough of something. And so that's another theme. And so this primary activity. But then there's this more kind of classic view that, well, it's classic in some ways, but the prior view I just said goes back all the way to like Heraclitus or whatever. But there is a view of a primary reactivity almost, or uh so this is about, the primary activity I'm describing here is one of force, of power, of the irrational, that which, it doesn't it's movement, it's electricity, it's intensity. It's movement, it's electricity, it's intensity, but it isn't rational, it isn't reason, and it can become that. And there's maybe you can see that embedded in it somehow, but that isn't what it is in the last instance, is the idea. Sorry, my speaking is a little bit different today because I'm trying to say less, so it's screwing with me. But then one could posit that perhaps these forces, these desires, are always proceeding forth posterior to thought, in a kind of logic, in a way. Because to even discuss these forces, to set these goals for yourself, to set a goal for yourself to become this kind of otherness, requires thinking and to become aware that it's happening, even um, for and there's this question of like, why do you even care? You know, because in a way, these kind of violent forces within you, there is uh why should you care about them? Why should you give yourself over to them? Why they can seem to be almost evil, they can seem to hurt you. There's this promise that there's vitalism, that there's something vital and wonderful in it. But in order to do that, you have to make an assessment. Really, you have to make there's a valuation always. There's always a valuation involved, and it's quite difficult to think of doing valuation without having some kind of scale of values, some kind of thing that you're valuing in reference to, you know, and even if your value is related to this primary activity, to a kind of sickness and health, like Nietzsche, this kind of positivity or affirmation, it's still evaluation, and it's quite thinkable. I'm doing such a poor job explaining these things today. This is fine. This is I was originally thinking about just writing an article about these things, and I probably will still end up writing an essay about this stuff. But this discussion is to help me get my thoughts together. I've been talking to my girlfriend about these things, and I wanted to project some of these thoughts into the world instead of just keeping them in the little philosophy hotbed that we have going on. But oh my god. Okay. Uh but yes, there's this completely different logic that one finds in, say, Plato, for example, that the desire that is bubbling up underneath the surface is there, but it is the thing that is reactive. And this is sort of a way that Christianity is often understood. This is a kind of religious theme also, often, that there is this kind of reason. And reason, this is in this case, you have to I spend a lot of time kind of savoring how strange of a word reason is and how many different things that it is. Like, reason for something, like reasoning is, you know, you have to think about, oh God, I'm doing such a bad job explaining it. But like when you hear reason, you have to me, this immediate invocation of teleology almost, that like purpose, assigning purpose, recognizing purpose, like, oh God, why was I? Oh, this is such a rough stream. That's fine. I This idea that there is a primary, like the world is primarily form, that things have a reason, that they have reason, they have form, they're formed according to a logos, and the world is mind primarily, and that there is this secondary reaction whereby this mind gets forgotten, or one falls into sin. So there's this forgetting, like in Plato, there's a forgetting, or, this sinfulness, like in Christianity, that this forgetting of this original formedness, this original purposeness, um, is bad. And this kind of reaction of kind of violent forces rebelling against this is is bad and unhealthy, and does not actually bring one to the highest fulfillment, does not actually bring one to what one could be, what one should be. Uh, ah, that's funny, silly. Um, and it's a very different kind of logic, but it's quite thinkable. It's quite thinkable because there are so many instances in life where you do have to, there's like discipline and self knowledge are so helpful. Um, in order to accomplish something like learning an instrument, for example, learning an instrument, playing. an instrument. Uh, I mean, maybe historicism. Well, what I'm talking. Well, I'm specifically. Well, no, I mean, I specifically, I think what is one of the things that's really interesting in valuation is that valuation to me often seems coextensive with teleology. You're identifying a purpose for something. You're identifying like something that something has a purpose, something has an end, something has like a tendency that it's pointed towards, and you're wanting to bring that out. And I think that this is both like this is the best and worst thing about reason. Like it's the worst because it is dangerous. It's dangerous and it can kind of close the ability to see further possibilities. It can, you know, yeah, it can just be this violent enclosure. Uh, I mean, the origins and goals are intermingled with the categories. Like these things are all they're all coextensive with each other. Like if you see if you see like uh the four causes, Aristotle's four causes are not like they're all linked to each other. They when you start seeing one of them, you start seeing the others. Like there is this presumption of a kind of a sort of immediate union, and their lenses of analyses for kind of their lenses of analyses, and they all complement each other. And so if you see the that which something is made of, that which defines, it's the kind of what it's made of, where it comes from, uh there is this, you are, even if you can't, you you're always doing evaluation about what it's for, what is this for. um and then gets interesting in Hegel with the idea of like, for what is it for you, what is it for itself, what some in what is something in it, what is something in itself, what is something in and for itself. Like the idea of like for itself in Hegel is related to teleology. It isn't justice, but it's related to teleology, at least how I understand it. um Oh goodness, oh goodness, oh goodness. But yes, so this idea to kind of assign and create this idea to assign purpose, to find purpose, uh, is what is so powerful and so dangerous about reason, and what's so interesting about it, right? Because if one decides, I want to be a musician, I want to play the piano, you have to discipline yourself to play the piano. You have to it's simply not possible to do in the vast majority of cases without a level of self-discipline and like focused learning, and having to engage with higher principles, even if you eventually abandon those, or even if you only engage with them a little bit. Like you have to kind of like, there is this, you have to making contact with these forms. It disciplines you in a way, and there's something violent about that, but it also allows you access to a plane of existence that is more intense, more beautiful, and more vital, that you couldn't have accessed without making contact with it. Okay, wait, let me see what you said. Distinction in my mind, teleology breaks the categories through pursuing them, and lets us talk about the goals of striving as the evolution of the modern evaluation. Wait, the distinction is teleology breaks the categories through pursuing them, and lets us talk about the goals of striving as the evolution of the modern evaluation. I'm not sure what you mean. Um, or the distinction between teleology and historic as the evolution of the mode of evaluation. Uh, So okay, so teleology. So you're saying the distinction between teleology and historicism is that like teleology has an openness to in these theses the concept. So you're saying that what I'm calling teleology corresponds to materialism rather than historicism, or I'm okay. Um, let me think. Let me think. The distinction between a good and bad use of the teleological form of thinking is like a really important thing to understand, and it actually has to do with the way that like reason and imagination, or Kelvalhall and or Rain Array and Kelvalhall relate to each other, and this is sort of something that I was actually going to get to. But I do think like the my point is more that like you're always doing reason, and reason is always importing teleology whether you want it to or not, and that one cannot discard this entirely. Like it's always happening. Like it's always happening, and you can't get around it. And in my opinion, it's like dishonest to it's dishonest to pretend that it's not. And my point is also that like, someone like Plato puts an absolute emphasis on this as like being good and being like better. Like this form of assigning, like this form of discovering or assigning purpose and reason. Um, I think with that example, I think I see what you're saying. The swans are so beautiful. The swans are so beautiful. But but yeah, my point is about like that there are these two different modes. These two different modes of thinking about reason, emphasizing the significance and the importance and like the superiority of reason, of contact with like of like the forms, higher principles, and this kind of the kind of culmination of this is a sort of idealism, versus from the other side the an emphasis on like on vitalism, on electricity, on irrational forces, on kind of like uh yeah, is as um oh, my cat keeps coming by and I gotta pet her. um as culminates in kind of different materialist kind of views. um and I you know I think I've so many it's so common for thinkers to say that one is the superior logic and the true thing, and that the other one is like bad and false, and bad and false and dishonest. and I think that one has to figure out a way to think both, and not only to just think both because there's a way of thinking both that reduces them both, but to sort of to hold them both at their extremes, to kind of hold them both at their extremes. Because the on the one hand, this sort of reason wants to find, or reason wants to find at its limits a reason for everything, a kind of ultimate rule that everything reduces down to, an ultimate dialectic. Hegel's, the absolute spirit, ultimate dialectic, the rule that goes for everything. That one guy who's thinking about who thinks that like the universe can be reduced to a graph, the Ruliad guy whose name I'm forgetting right now. Um, who I have a friend who's very into this idea, and there's something that is interesting about it. But then, um, and but at the same time, you know, the and on the other end, like, to really think how powerful it is to become, to become a to for everything in you to be transfigured and open to being something completely other than itself. Like, to stop for a second, to kill that impulse that says that this must be so and so, that this has a reason, that this uh that this that to see a form, and into, to think that form is static, or has reached its apex, or that you grasp its essence, to be able to stop that for just, for just a minute, for just a little while, because it can only be for a little while, but then, and to allow this this intense kind of acephalic, like, creative becoming to flash through. um and to think what it would mean, to live a life where that was happening all the time, because then, in its highest form, this is just so beautiful, and anyone who is an artist, or, people experience this in love sometimes. um there's there's this experience that is, this experience of being created carried for. um no, no, reason I'm not no, reason is not acephalic. I'm talking about, um, the I'm talk like, now I'm when I started talking about, like, so the I'm talking about attempting to think the most extreme versions of both of these theses before one tries to synthesize them. Because I think that you clip the wings of either of them if you try to collapse them too early, before you have tried to think them to their ends, to try to give them their biggest due. This is the thing that's really, you know, uh, yeah, this is a thing that I think is really significant, and it's really hard to do, and oftentimes one does just end up kind of collapsing them into a sort of middle way. But I think that, or at least I do a lot of the time, because it's really hard. But, like, it seems to me simultaneously true that, like, really, it seems to me simultaneously true somehow that things could be reduced to these particular laws, that, like, there is this kind of reason and purpose for myself and for my body and for the world, that there is this kind of dialectic of absolute mind going on. This seems really possible, and there are moments when I'm very, very convinced of this, but it seems at the same time that, like, this is completely posterior to a process that is going on, that is completely irrational, has that is has no reason at all, completely groundless, and is intensive more than anything else. Is in, and that life really should be about one giving oneself over to these kind of forces, and becoming, becoming a body without organs, so that then, all this kind of things can grow forth from you, and kind of spring forth from your energy, and kind of, just have go, and just kind of, I don't know. It's and because, you know there's been so many times in my life when I was, completely cucking myself, because I was convinced that it had to be so and so, or that, something, I couldn't do this thing because that was wrong, or that I couldn't be this way because it wasn't possible, or it was against the rules, or, like, it like, you know that, like, it's just not that's not what one does, or that, I wasn't good enough, or that I had to I had to go through some process, or gain approval, or all these things, and that I got through it by just exploding that logic, and I just became this thing that I didn't understand, where I was carried forward by something that didn't make any sense. And um, and I have these times when I just moved forward, and it was like magic. It was like magic. And um and those times were so important for me becoming who I am, and they were so and sometimes they were terrifying, sometimes they were wonderful. Um but there is this sense that I often have, that this is, like, bubbling just beneath me at all times, and that it is really what I am. It is really what I am. and that I'm entirely posterior to it, and that is the actual activity, and that all I am doing at any given time is restraining it, and that it would somehow, and that somehow I just shouldn't, um, and that like it's better for me to make contact with it as much as I possibly can, to activate it, to make space for it, um, but at the same, but at the same time, like I wouldn't have become who like I wouldn't be here talking about philosophy. I wouldn't, be making music and doing all these things if I had not subjected myself to this kind of, to a kind of rational discipline, to kind of learn things, to work through things, with my mind, to kind of engage in the social, and to learn these rules, to kind of set, uh is this what understand as Spinoza's imminence? Is this the death drive within desire? Um, the well, I'm not this. I don't think what I'm talking about has much to do with imminence, Spinoza's imminence, or like I could connect it, but this is not something that I have in mind. Um, the Spinoza's synthesis is very strange. And I mean that in a neutral to positive sense. Very strange. No one else does it like him. I do respect that as much as he drives me crazy. I do respect that no one else does it like he did. The As far as Death Drive, it's related to what it's related to what I was talking about with these kind of irrational forces inside of me, but it's more, I don't know, I tend to think of Death Drive as sort of prior to those, or like Death Drive is not just these forces. Death Drive is not just will. Death Drive is not just the will to power. It's not just production forces. Death Drive is something that is different, that is more like Death Drive is the possibility at any given time that something could become different from itself, and that it does, and that it will. Um, and this movement happens both in reason and in uh, unreason, because within reason it has to do with negativity and self-relating negativity that drives forward dialectics, right? Um, there's this, within reason, reason has this desire to move towards higher laws, and it has this kind of disciplining force, but it's always breaking itself, because in its desire to know, to reach the limits of a thought, to reach a form. When you touch the form becomes other than itself. A does not equal A. When you find out when you really, really come to know what something is, it changes. When you really come to know what something is, it changes. It isn't the same as it was before. The subject becomes other to itself. And you can think about this in when you describe a form very precisely, the world changes, like in science. Um, and then space is open for a new theory, and then the new theory discovers that, oh, it's not quite that either, and we move from Newtonian physics to quantum physics, and now we can't reconcile quantum physics and general relativity or whatever. There's this dialectic, and that has to do with negativity, and that negativity is sort of related to Death Drive. But then there is also there's also the forces, and the kind of uh Death Drive there is more difficult to describe, but it's like related to, for me, the way that like those forces seem to emerge in an almost impossibility, um a sort of impossible, like they're able to do things that are impossible in a kind of way, um and they're and also in a way, this sort of that which kind of is able to restrain them. Like the fact that they kind of coagulate into unities as all as, is sort of a negation of um them being not that. There is this sort of death drive is related to a kind of nonsense. Death drive is related to death drive. I see. I tend to think about death drive in terms of Heil, in terms of Heil and nothingness. Who this is, neither unity nor multiplicity. Neither one nor many, neither reason nor unreason. And is an absolute absolute negativity, or an absolute opposite pole. So, it's the tendency of anything to become other than itself, and for reason, this is dialectic and negativity, and for imagination, it's more about, I don't know. I actually don't. I haven't fully developed this, but that was it's an interesting question. Um, uh, Yes, yes. I mean that. Yeah, 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 for sure. And this is Zizek calls this the fragile absolute, um, and Kandinsky thinks about this in the same in a very similar way in his book on the spiritual in art, which Geist has the Geist in the title. Anyway, the something Geistics and whatever. Anyway, the oh my god, no art. That's so funny. It's a uh, arts is doctor anyway. It's Kunst. Anyway, the so silly Eschaton. Anyway, where was I? I have included in the bottom of the screen. Uh, I mentioned this at the beginning, and then I didn't address the fact that I put it here. Is some of the last the last five antinomies of apocalyptic humanism, which I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, um, and the they touch on what I'm talking about here. Or what I'm talking about here is related to these. Um these are conceived of as a non-exhaustive list of fundamental contradictions in our current horizon, or their antinomies in our current cognitive horizon. And the point is to savor them and kind of patiently, kind of tug at them and hope for a resolution to appear, and to also avoid the trap of falling into one or the other um, side of these, because even though they're very abstract, a lot of political movements, philosophical ideas, kind of ideology in general depends on collapsing these into a known answer. Uh, so I'm just going to read off these final five. The first five are more related to kind of God and Christ, but these are more related to reason and unreason. Uh, Number six, there are cosmic polarities that govern all reality, like light or dark, near or far, or not. Polarity is something that humans impose on the tiny corner of reality we engage with. Number seven, the aeons of world history are ineluctably leading somewhere. Time has its meaning in the resolution of the human condition, or not. Each aeon is incommensurable with all the others, forming a series of forest paths with no higher meaning. Number eight, the enlightened path is a higher vitalism, a living in faith that is almost a delirium, or it is a diminution or even cessation of all craving. Number nine, the reigning order in the world is an evil, hypocritical, false authority, a Pharisee which must be fought and overthrown, or it is not. It's better not to fight, but just to build the reality you want to see. Believing in the Pharisee's existence is a trap of bad faith. Number 10, the world is ultimately comprehensible as a set of symbols, or the highest truth, or the highest truth is mystical, vital, and populated by spiritual personalities which do not obey reason or Occam's razor. So, we could relate all of these to reason and to reason and unreason, even though they don't quite reduce to that and they don't map fully cleanly to that. But what we could think about this as manifestations of this same of these same ideas. You know, the idea of absolute forms, of absolute measuring rods, of absolute form, absolute measuring rods, of the necessity of valuation. I was saying earlier that like there's this idea with when you're really deep into philosophy of reason that valuations, and I was kind of saying that it seems like valuation is kind of always happening. It's always happening, and so how could one? It's difficult to even think of reality as existing without proceeding forth from value in some way. And so this, so reason, and then the unreason would be, well, no, it's just it's not something. There's no value. There's no true value at all. There's no real value. There's no polarities. There's no distinction between this and that. Ultimately, it's just this kind of thing that we do. Um, and then, number 7, the idea that, history is building towards something, in like communism or the kingdom of heaven, or, even just the liberal state, is this culmination of what is possible, and then it kind of builds on all previous forms, and this idea that you can analyze this series of regimes and see that they're going somewhere. You can understand this progression of the human condition as knowledge builds, and that this is all going somewhere, this hope for that, or the idea that maybe it isn't, um because so many, and whew, I didn't even talk about the value of this. Think about, with this one, it's so common for violence to make a an appeal to necessity, the necessity of history, of a historical dialectic, of this place that things are going, this sort of inevitability. And this is you can shake yourself out of this for a minute by realizing that they don't really know that for certain. They don't really know that for certain. And maybe you just need to wake up to whatever's going on right now and kind of not worry about this. Like this is like this sort of Heideggerian idea that like being is always being rediscovered anew. Um, and yes, and then 8, and this is related directly to what I was talking about earlier, the idea that this idea of, I say this idea of a lot, intensity, acephalic intensity, creativity, grace, sort of this intensity versus restriction, and movement of your eyes upward, like in Plato's Symposium. You rise to the apprehension of the higher and higher forms of beauty. No, it did the thing. And one can think about this in the sort of reason way, like I said with the Symposium, and then it's a very common religious theme that you give up your attachment to the world, you, through asceticism, you ascend and reach enlightenment. And then number 10 especially is another one. Maybe principle, there's this quote. Oh, let me read this quote. Let me read this quote from Ante Yudkowsky that I was just reading. One could only have a difficulty with the problems between quantum physics and general relativity if one believed that there exists a real law of physics, one in which our incomplete laws are an approximation of, and this is the law which we are worried about violating. But where would this law be written? Inscribed by the deity somewhere? Written in the computer code that defines the simulation we exist in, etc.? It boggles the mind to attempt to place it. Often popular science paperbacks of the kind written by Hawking, etc., lapse into deism when they get metaphysical. They talk about the moment when God wrote down the laws of physics in a time before time. All this can be made clearer if we exhume the dominant metaphor here, reveal what is going on in our imaginations. People have started to think about nature in a strange way. The law of physics. This phrase is so commonplace that we do not consider how strange it is. There is no actual law governing the motions of molecules. The molecules will not go to jail if they disobey the decree of some sheriff to keep following in straight lines unless adjusted. As such, it does not need to be written anywhere. It is just that, Through observation, we have found that, at least in strictly controlled conditions, this seems to be what molecules always do. We have discovered enough of molecular behavior to make predictions which are nearly always accurate. But why have we started to imagine that, say, water always freezes at 0 degrees Celsius because it is following some kind of orders from a cop, rather than this simply being what it does? This is the sort of poetry we have decried in order we have decided, oh my goodness, we have decided to introduce into everyday life, where things happen only by restraint. We're in a universe in which everything that happens does so under someone's authority. Nothing escapes the bull of the metaphysical sheriff. We will see that this type of gesture perhaps has deeper implications that initially appear. So this is a very interesting, this idea that things in the world, that's just what they do. That's just what they do. And it's not actually because they're related to some kind of reason, some kind of law, some kind of form. And this is strange, but in a way, like it's thinkable. It's thinkable and it's worth bearing in mind, even as much as it seems by modern science and most assumptions that the world can be reduced to this set of laws and that we're approaching them in some way. Universal laws of physics, universal rights, etc. Or not. Oh god. Okay. So now I'm gonna I don't and a way that I tend to think about these forces, these agencies, perhaps, these things that are happening within me, the reason, the unreason, the active, the reactive, is, oh goodness. Oh, is my mic on? Good. Is, I've been contemplating a while for this scene, or this whole kind of theme that shows up in the end of Higurashi when they cry. Or it's not the end. It's actually right at the beginning of the answer arcs, I think. Um, that I have on screen. I have on screen this scene, um, where, spoilers for Higurashi, which is old. Uh, but everyone's in a time loop. Everyone's in a time loop, and they're reliving these like horrific series of events that happen over and over, whereby someone goes crazy, gets paranoid and goes crazy and kills people. And it's slightly different every time, and they keep repeating the events because there's a goddess who is trying to stop it from happening. And most of the characters, all the characters in general, are not aware that this process is happening. Everyone's in the wheel of samsara. They're all in samsara. And, there's one character who's awake to this and who is despairing because of everyone's inability to get out. But everyone's fighting against each other. They're struggling against each other. Because there's this, it's paranoia. The big thing that instigates this event and every time is someone starts getting sick and they get paranoid. They don't trust anyone. They don't trust anyone, and they think that the world is out to get them. And they create their own, in a way, they create their own monster by this happening to them. By their paranoia, they create the violence that becomes their own ends and becomes the things that comes to get them. Uh, but then it turns out that there is actually this kind of thing that's happening underneath the surface. But then it turns out that the thing that's happening, where it seemed like it was a natural force, was also this failure of someone else's imagination. Um, and the moment that I'm showing on screen is from this really pivotal turn, where one of the characters starts to realize that they're in the time loop, and two of the characters start to realize that they're in the time loop. And the way that it happens is through forgiveness. Not just through forgiveness, but through a very interesting, very specific kind of thing that happens where, so the character on screen, Rena, um, she gets the disease where gets paranoid and starts going crazy. And because she is clever, because she is incredibly clever and incredibly creative, she, in order to protect herself from the forces that she sees as being out to get her in her paranoia, takes the entire school hostage and has this really elaborate hostage plan whereby she's attempting to unveil this conspiracy that she is convinced is happening, that she is actually partially right about in a way that one finds out later. But it seems like she's just going mad. It seems like she's just going mad. And she is going crazy. She's going crazy, she's paranoid, she's freaked the fuck out. But there's this thing, what's on screen is there is she and Keiichi, who is the sort of the main character, or who seems the initial main character of the series, but he actually isn't. But he's the guy who's the POV character for a lot of it. You know, and they sort of have crushes on each other, but they have in this particular arc, they have a kind of rivalry thing that's happening. Or earlier in the arc, they have a one-on-one fight in a kind of water gun competition that's like really dazzling. And I would play the anime clip for their, but right at this point they're fighting on the roof. They're fighting on the roof, and because you know, Keiichi has managed to stop her hostage plan, and she is still paranoid and freaked out, and he decides to fight her head on. And during the fighting, she realizes like suddenly how much she like trusts him, and like she trusts him, she loves him, and she sees in this struggle there's this joy, this pure joy that awakens in this struggle, that is that overflows and turns it into play from this thing that was life and death. But it had to be, but it sort of had to be life or death first. Uh, and there's this quote that I think about from that was in Klosowski's Living Currency, about like seriousness is the price of pleasure, or something like this. This I oh God, it would be better if I remembered it more exactly. And I wish I could do a better job of selling this scene, and I've thought about this for so long, and I don't have it. Maybe I need to check my go check my notes, where I've talked about this. But there's something about there's something about this image of waking up in the middle of a struggle that's happening, and continuing with, like, they don't, like, she wakes up, but they keep fighting anyway. Like, they take the fight to the end, but it takes on this whole other meaning, because she, you know, it's she, you know, if she realizes that in the fight that she still wants to win, but she doesn't want to be right about thinking that she can't trust him and that everything is wrong. And it becomes, it's a contest of wills still, but it becomes this thing that's much more productive and much more beautiful, whereby something is being worked out. Um and I there's something about, there's something about the way that I think about the relationship between reason and unreason, that is something like this, where they sort of, in the way I think about contradiction in the world in general, that there is this struggle that is going on that kind of needs to happen, but there is a way to kind of wake up in the middle of it, and not to abandon it, but to realize that this, to be in it but without hate, and it changes, and it's not just to continue with it anyway, but you're now in a disconnected way. It changes what you're doing and how you're doing it, but in a way that doesn't abolish the fact that you're still struggling, and that but there's something produced here. There's this, like, friendly competition that is beautiful and forgiving and um it's both active and reactive because you're fighting against this piece of yourself that you put in the other in a way, but God, God, I'm doing such a bad job of explaining this. Oh, this is so dissatisfying. Let me go check. Let me go look at my notes. Let me go look at my notes and see if I can remember. There's this other thing. Okay, so this is related to this other part. I forgot to mention this. What inspires Keiichi to kind of like take her on, um, and to believe that she can be awoken from this paranoia that's leading her to like put everyone's lives at risk and stuff, is he has this memory of in a past version of the time loop. He has this memory awakened suddenly because he doesn't normally have the memory, but he has a memory awakened suddenly of the time that he went crazy and he got super paranoid and was killing people. Of Rena seeing him going crazy and like pulling out taking out his baseball bat and preparing to beat her to death, which he then does. But she looks at him with open arms. She looks at him with open arms and she like there's and there's in this the trauma of this, like the power of this act of 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 acceptance and love and forgiveness kind of like just really changes him, and it's very Higurashi is so Christian. Higurashi is so incredibly Christian. Oh my god. But anyway, the but then and it's not and there's a moment when he um and so there's these two things that are connected, and there's this giving that's fully necessary, this gift, and then and also, you know, it's connected to this idea that they're in samsara, but you can wake up from it, from these acts of giving, but also these kind of mutual struggles. And oh god, this is it's okay. And I think about a lot this image in the Old Testament where, you know, the name Israel comes from wrestling with God. And so that's what this is. There's this kind of wrestling with God, wrestling with yourself, wrestling with other people. There's a kind of struggle. There's a kind of struggle that is serious, but you're always waking up anew inside of it. And there's something about this framing that allows one, at least for me, to think about things like active and reactive forces, about reason and desire, um, as being these things that love each other in a way. That they're fighting, but they're fighting in a way where they're always waking up to the fact that there's this joy, and there is this kind of something shared that can be found. I don't know.